Masay Tavshin Lamed Gimel. So, by Dabrin by Shal Rosh Matas Yisrael Leimer, Moshe spoke to the heads of the Shvatim, to the Yidden, saying, this is the matter that Hashem commanded. And he explains the specific ideas and concepts of the parsha of vows. A person that makes a vow, will not, should not make his words mundane. They should not desanctify his name, his words. They should not make it like worthless, but should keep it in its holiness and its strength and power that he gave the force of the vow to. Like everything, the way it goes out of his mouth, that way he pronounces it, according to what he says, that's what he should do and fulfill. It's known, the examination of this in the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe and Likutei Torah, and the Mamorim of Arabeim following this, especially in the manuscript and the Chassidus book of the Rebbe Marash of the year Tov Reish Lamed, that's 1870, that it had recently been published. In other words, in Tavshin Lamed Gimel, 1973, they had just published this sefer of the Rebbe Marash from the Mamorim of Tov Reish Lamed. So they ask over there in those different Mamorim, the Tzarech Lahavim, we need to understand, Shoyresh Inyan Hanedorim. What is the root of the idea of vows? Where does it come from? Shinyanam Lesser Isar al Nafshet. The idea behind them is to prohibit something upon himself, to make something prohibited to him. This means, obviously we're not talking about something that's already prohibited. Similar to what we mentioned in the previous mimer, that a person can take an oath to fulfill mitzvahs. Over there, he is making an oath on something that's already prohibited to him. He's saying he has a very great desire to eat something that's not kosher, so he can make an oath and he says, I swear I won't eat this. So in that case, the oath is on something that's already prohibited. But in the case of our parsha, the case of vows, vows is not about the idea of adding a prohibition upon this, something that's already prohibited, but rather ki'im lesser samuter, to prohibit that which is permitted. The l'chura in the movement, seemingly it's not understood. Since there are things that Torah prohibited, there are those things that the Torah permitted. Why does he come to prohibit that which the Torah permitted to him? In other words, the Rebbe in the brackets over here is elaborating and explaining the questions in the Torah and the Marash Mamorim. What's the idea behind this? Why would a person want, obviously from a spiritual perspective, what would push a person to go ahead and make something that's permitted, should make it prohibited? And not only that, but there's reason to say that not only is it unnecessary, but there's reason to say that it's incorrect. Halayom Razal b'Yerushalmi, the Chazal said in the Yerushalmi, Reish Perek Test Nedarim, the beginning of the 9th chapter of Masechtas Nedarim, Huva b'Shmoina Prakim Laram Perek Dal, also brought down in the Shmoina Prakim of the Rambam's commentary to Mishnayos, where he speaks about the different levels in service of Hashem, and he enumerates different types of levels of type of service, what's considered a chassid, what's considered a gibor, what's considered a tzaddik, and so on. So the Rambam says, Loi dayecha, and the Yerushalmi says, and the Rambam quotes it, Loi dayecha mashas l'cha Torah. Is it insufficient what Torah prohibited to you? El shem atem avakish lesser alecha dvarim achedim, but you are searching to prohibit upon yourself even other matters. In other words, what are you adding? The Torah already gave you enough prohibited things. Why by what reason are you adding this? In other words, the Yerushalmi and the Rambam seem to look at it as something negative, that a person is going ahead and making on himself a vow and taking upon himself a neder on things that ordinarily he would not be prohibited to do. And the Yerushalmi says, what are you doing this for? Don't you have sufficient things to take care of, to be prohibited? So now the Rebbe is adding something again in the brackets. The Rebbe is going to say, seemingly, once we bring the Yerushalmi, and very often, many places, it brings down the Yerushalmi, and that's it. It's happy with bringing down the Yerushalmi about this question that the Yerushalmi says, Loi dayach mashasol l'chatoira. Here, it's brought down also the Rambam in Shmoyne Prokim. So the Rebbe wants to know, what are we adding by bringing in the Rambam as well? So the Rebbe says in the brackets on line 18, the reason why the Maimer is very exact to say that this is also found in the 8 Prokim of the Rambam, the 8 chapters of the Rambam, because the above mentioned statement of the Yerushalmi, we only find it in the Yerushalmi and not in the Bavli. And therefore, the Maimer adds that it's also brought down in the Shmoyne Prokim of the Rambam, because that gives it a little bit more strength and validity and application to us. With this it's emphasized. It's a lesson, directive, it's applicable to everyone, like other things that's brought down over there. In other words, if it would say in the Yerushalmi, so in general, we study the Bavli, and we don't just study the Bavli, but we follow the rulings of the Bavli. The fact that something is brought down in the Yerushalmi, and if the Bavli leaves it out, not necessarily would we say that it's applicable to us. Comes the Maimer and says, let me show you that the Rambam in the Shmoyne Prokim that gives his directives in the service of Hashem and so on and so forth, he also brings this down as well. So that means that it's a practical lesson for us as well. It's not just something that was just a Yerushalmi thing that people don't observe. So that's why he felt it necessary to bring in the Shmoyne Prokim Rambam as well. Yet, last line on the page, the Rebbe says we could add to this question, top of page, second page on Maimer, page Vav, according to what said in a different place in the Yerushalmi, Al kol shera einoi v'loy ochal. When a person's going to come to the Bezdin Shel Maila, to the heavenly court, he's going to have to answer for everything that his eye saw and he did not consume. That's a really powerful thing. Not just that the Yerushalmi says, is it insufficient for you, what the Torah prohibited, but on top of that, we're saying even more so, that the person is responsible to eat whatever he perceives. So it seems just the opposite of the idea of vows. Shalpizi, Paul Yoser, according to this, even a greater wonder, Mao in Nadarim, what's the idea of the vows? That he prohibits upon himself something is permitted. Another question that Rebbe asks in line 4, Gam Tzarech Lahavin, also we need to understand. Why is this parsha said specifically to the heads of tribes? Now we know, Rashi explains the reason for this, that from this we derive the laws of Hataras Nedarim, that how do you release from vows, in addition for a father and a husband releasing her from vows, if you have a Rav, who is a mumche, who is an expert, he can also release from vows, and that's what we learn out from the fact that was told to Rosh Hamatas, to the heads of tribes, that's considered like a Yachid mumche. And what Rashi explained, that this comes to teach us that releasing of vows is through a and a single person that's an expert. If there's no single person that's an expert, so then he could become released from vows by three ordinary people that get together and make a bezdin and can release him from his vow based on certain criteria. Even this itself needs explanation. In other words, first he asked in general, why Rosh Amatis? Why is this different than any other mitzvah that doesn't say that was told to the heads of tribes? On top of that, the question is more so. True, we explained that we learn out the din of Yachid Mumche from it, but that itself needs explanation. Why does the release of vows have to be specifically by a individual, it's an expert, or three ordinary people that comprise a bezdin? So he says, maybe I should ask that about the entire law of releasing a vow. So he says, no. This makes sense when it comes to a father nullifying the vows of his daughter, or when a husband nullifies the vows of his wife. It's explained in the Kli Yakar commentary in the Torah. That's because every woman is under the control of her father, to such a degree that the father is able to make her engaged and to marry her off, like it says, as I have given my daughter to this man. This giving over a daughter to another man is something that matters for the rest of the days of her life. So we see how much control the father has over his daughter. If he could make such a major life decision for her, that her entire life she's going to be married to this man, how much more so when it comes to a specific matter as preventing and stopping her and removing a vow that she made. So that's logical. Oy Bailon, the same thing, her husband, she's under the control of her husband, and therefore it makes sense that the husband can remove her vow. Like it says in Chumash Bereshis, that he will rule over you, the husband rules over the wife. Therefore, he's able also to release and nullify her vows. But we still need to understand what's the connection between the release of vows specifically to an expert individual, to an expert rav, etc. Oizbeis, line 21. This is be understood by first prefacing an explanation in the general service of a person. That's it's divided into three aspects and components. The mitzvahs aseh, there's the positive commandments, or mitzvah divrei reshus, there are things that are permitted to be done. In other words, they're not a mitzvah, but they're not an avera. And then there are things that are prohibited by a negative commandment. These are the three ideas of holiness, that's mitzvah aseh. Klibas noiga, that's things that are permitted. Those are inyanim of the Klibas noiga, they're neither kedusha nor prohibited like Shal Shvat Meis. And then the prohibited things, the Loisa says that Shal Shvat Meis, these are the Shal Shvat Meis. That these three things, the way they're down here, are descended and drawn down from above, like all matters are drawn down from above. That initially everything begins in holiness, complete and total holiness. The world of Atzilus is entirely holy. Top of page Zion. All of them are concerning Atzilus. It says, Lo Yegur Chara, that no bad will dwell with you. It's entirely good. So that's similar to the idea of Kedusha, the idea of Mitzvah Aseh. Completely and totally good. Nothing negative, nothing bad in it. From there, it descends below through intermediaries. Initially, the world of creation, that majority is good, and the minority of it is bad. And afterwards, the world of Yitzira, that's half and half. Until the world of action, including our world, that's the majority, the negative. The Kedusha, is that in the world of Asiya, you have all three things of holiness, you have Klippus Noiga, and you have Shol Tzat Meis. So the Rebbe goes on and says, when we talk about both extremes of the spectrum, the mitzvahs aseh on one side and mitzvahs loiseh on the other side, divrei reshus are in the middle, but the mitzvahs aseh and loiseh are the both extremes. Over there, in that, there's one Torah for everyone. And it's revealed to us and to our children, all Yidden equally. When it comes to permitted matters, it's dependent on the avoid of every single person according to their measure, according to their level. If he's in such a state that through eating he will be able to, and he is likely to, elevate the food from the world of Klippus Noiga to become part of Kedusha, is he the other way? Or is he the opposite? That his state and situation spiritually is, he's going to take the food that's initially from Klippus Noiga because it's kosher food, and he's going to bring it down to the Shol Tzat Meis is going to bring it down. And not only does it bring the food down there, but this impacts the person himself. Through this also causes a descent in the person that's eating as well. Like the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 7 in Tanya, in the meaning of the word heter and mutter. It's from the word released, untied. This means it's not tied up, it's not bound up in the hands of the external ones of the klippos. Something that's in Shol Tzat Meis is bound up over there, can't be elevated. But things from Klippus Noiga, permitted things, these are released, these can be elevated. Therefore, when he eats something that's permitted for the sake of heaven, like it's brought down Shulchan Aruch, how one needs to engage in the physical world, that all your actions should be done for the sake of heaven. Even more so, in all your ways you should know it. Like we know, the Rebbe says there's two levels. One level is, I'm doing my actions now, but the result will be for the sake of heaven. Then there's another level where in the action, in the ways that I'm doing now, I see Hashem in that as well. That's a higher level. But in both ways, he is taking the thing from Klippus Noiga, he's taking the food from Klippus Noiga, and he's using it in a positive way and elevating it to Kedusha. So then he says in line 22, then the food rises up and becomes part of holiness. But if, heaven forbid, he eats to fulfill the desires of his animal soul, even lower than that, for even lower than just filling his desires. Not sure exactly what he means, worse than that. So then, so then this food from Klippus Noigam descends and becomes part of the Shol Tzat Meis, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. So now, the Rebbe says, even though the Alter Rebbe primarily uses these terms for food, but the truth is, this involves all human endeavors, all human activities that is in the middle between mitzvahs, mitzvahs, and divrei reshus. The Rebbe is going to enumerate how it can be in a positive way and chas shalom in the opposite, elevated to kedusha, or the other way. So he says in line 25, just like when it comes to food, sustenance, eating, so too it's concerning garments and a home. Like we know, the three aspects of food, garments, and home, these include all a human's needs. And he goes and he gives examples of it. Like for example, when it comes to a home, concerning this, the Chazal say concerning a home, top of page Ches, they said, a beautiful home broadens the mind of a person. It opens up his mind. If you're in a comfortable environment, if you're in a comfortable home, it allows his mind to be broadened. What's the purpose of having a mind broadened? Then his Torah learning that he does with his mind is better. Through having this beautiful home, this allows him and makes it easier for him to go into depth in Torah study. As opposed to when his study is in a way of being in a very uncomfortable environment, in a very difficult, confined and uncomfortable environment. In other words, the opposite of harchava. Harchava means broad. So this is constricted and constrained environment. So then his concentration in Torah learning is affected. But the Rebbe says this only applies once he's already in the world of Torah study. Line 4, this is only after he is already in a level of Torah study. But the beginning of Torah study is not about comfort, actually. The beginning of Torah study is the opposite of comfort. That it says that you need to exile yourself to go to a place of Torah. Exile means not being comfortable. In a place of exile, the person does not feel at home, he does not feel himself, he doesn't have all the comforts of home and so on. What does that mean? Also, it reflects a spiritual state. That he is wandering away from all the desires and pleasures of this world. How come? Why does he need to wander away from the pleasure of this world? Why can't we allow him to have a very comfortable environment? Because the distractions of the world will be distracted and won't allow him to engage and invest himself totally in Torah study. Therefore, we tell him, go into exile, leave all the pleasures of the world behind, so you should be able to be focused only on Torah learning. Shizel close Maimon Mishnah. That's a general statement of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Kachi darke shel Torah. This is the way of Torah. Pasva melach toichal, eat just bread with salt. Umayim b'mesuda tishtein, should drink water in a measured cup, in a measured instrument, utensil. In other words, limit your physical engagement, your material engagements. So therefore, but once he's already involved in Torah study, adrab, the more comfortable, the easier it is for him to concentrate. But again, he needs to use it out for Torah study, just like the food that he eats needs to be l'shem shamayim. Another example of someone using the physical world in a positive way, so he says, line 10 to line 10. So too it's concerning the idea of riches. On the one hand, through this he could increase in the mitzvah of tzedakah. But on the other hand, there is such a situation where a person's riches are actually kept for that person, but for his detriment. In other words, a person that's unworthy and not doing right things, and he's engaged in negative activities, So the fact that he is rich, this is really being used, and this is something for his detriment. It's a klippedik thing. Like for example, the riches of Korach, the Chazal say that Korach was very rich, and that led him down the path of his destruction, that he had the chutzpah to argue against Moshe, etc., etc. So we see again a physical thing. It can be used in a positive way. The riches can be used in a way that'll have now more money for tzedakah, or it could be used in a way that will lead to the person's downfall. In other words, the riches has to do with klippa. So he says, line 15, so too also concerning the general idea of ashiris, of riches, not just in riches, in money, just in his soul characteristics. Like for example, there is a person that we say, Ein ani ela badas, that a person's only poor in knowledge, and then there's Ein asher ela badas, someone that's rich in knowledge. There's someone that uses his riches and knowledge in the service of Hashem. Just the opposite. There are those that their riches affect by them, that they grew fat, meaning they were very successful. Yeshurun is a name for Yidden. Vayivot, and they rebelled. They kicked. So the opposite of the idea of the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. So there are two ways how any of a person's endeavors and involvements and needs can go, those things that are in the permitted things. So the Rebbe goes on and it says, this, which way it will go, is dependent on the person's state and situation. That says that a tzaddik eats to satisfy his soul. In other words, it's not just a benefit for his body, like you say in a minute, but it's a soul benefit. Instead of dragging his soul into klippa, it's a beneficial thing for his soul. I know this means by a tzaddik, his eating affects satiation and satisfaction, not just in the literal sense concerning his body, but also for his soul. And the opposite is by a Rasha. Concerning this, it says, Beten Rishoyim Techsar. It says the stomach of Rishoyim will be lacking, it will be empty. They have empty stomachs. Hainu, what does this mean? First of all, by their eating, it's only a stomach activity. By a tzaddik, his eating satiates his soul, it helps him spiritually, it gives him the energy for Torah and avodas Hashem, etc. By the Rasha, the whole eating is a stomach activity. It's not a spiritual thing. It has nothing to do with the brain that's in the head. It's only about the delight of his stomach. Therefore, this type of eating affects by him an idea of a lack and a deficiency in his soul. Because as we said before, that a person that doesn't eat l'shem shamayim, a person that doesn't eat for the sake of heaven, he eats for his bodily needs. So instead of elevating the klippas noiga to kedusha by his eating, instead he is taking this food and he's immersing it in shal shvat meis. And not only is he taking his food and immersing it in the shal shvat meis, which originally began from klippas noiga, but the person himself becomes now bound up with shal shvat meis. So that's what he says in the next line. Top of page 10. Since by Yid, matters of the body are connected with matters of the soul. So this eventually also impacts negatively his body. That's why it says Beten Rishayim Techsar. It doesn't say that the soul of the Rasha is lacking, but the stomach of the Rasha is lacking. Why? Because since the soul is lacking by the Rasha, so therefore the soul and body are interconnected, and it makes a lacking in his body as well. Any questions?
Recording stop.